Our university is comprised of several renowned and burgeoning scholars of Oceania. And as you can see, and I was pleased to see on our schedule that many of them are serving as moderators here today. Personally, as a scholar of Hawaiian and Pacific history myself, I'm genuinely excited about the sessions that are listed on the schedule. And so this is really enriching not only for our campus and our students, but for our faculty and even for our administration. It's fitting to have this conference here in Lāʻie. Lāʻie has traditionally been identified as a pu'uhonua, a kind of sanctuary, a place that has embodied and promoted Hawaiian concepts of peace and aloha. Our campus story of the university also ties into Lāʻie's identity as a pu'uhonua, or sanctuary, and it resonates with the objectives of this conference. So I'll give you a little brief background to BYU Hawaii, which first started off as Church College of Hawaii. It's a small school. We have around 3,000 students from about 60 different countries. These students are primarily from Oceania and the Asian Rim. Our bold vision is to promote unity and intercultural understanding in a climate or a setting of diversity. By learning and working together in a kind of living laboratory. Those are actually words from the founder of this university, David O. McKay, called it a living laboratory, and through the gospel of Jesus Christ. BYU Hawaii was founded in 1955 with a mission to build leaders into the world, to send out leaders into the world, and establish peace internationally. So it's a beautiful place with an ambitious mission and vision. Our school's origin story, although it began in 1955, the origin story begins in 1921, 34 years prior, when David O. McKay, who was a young apostle church leader for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, went on touring of different missions throughout outside of the United States, and he stopped here in Hawaii. He was in Honolulu on his way to Samoa and other places. He came out here to Hawaii. The temple over here that you see, this beautiful white building, was just dedicated not long earlier in 1919. So he came out here and attended an elementary school opening flag-raising ceremony. And that was here in Lāʻie. And he had a profound experience there that would shape and influence his mind for the next 34 years. So he was inspired by the children and how the gospel could unite a community of so much diversity. At that time in 1919, Lāʻie was mostly sugarcane plantations, and there were a lot of people that were here, living here from various places of the world: China, Philippines, Japan, and native Hawaiians working together. And this really hit him really hard, had a profound impact on his perspective toward the future of the world, and particularly in the church, which at that time was mostly gathering in Salt Lake City in Utah. He explained, in quote, "My bosom swelled with emotion and tears came to my eyes, and I felt like bowing in prayer and thanksgiving by this experience with these young children in 1921. In his journal, Elder McKay mentions some specific students by name and nationality. He says, he notes a Hawaiian student named William Ka'a'a, an American student named Thomas Wadaps, and a Japanese student named Otokoshi Matsumoto, just among the many individuals that he had met that morning. So this experience stayed with him for the next 30 years, and when he became the president of the church in 1951, he worked to establish this university. So it's interesting to me, it intrigues me, because that means that impact was profound enough to stick with him for more than 30 years. So he worked to establish the university, which he opened shortly thereafter. He also became known as the president who steered the church into a more international focus. So as a historian, I'm compelled to consider the broader historical context of this story. For example, in 1921, when David O. McKay first envisioned a racially integrated institution of higher learning, much of American society, even in education, was separated by racial segregation. In fact, it wasn't until 1954, the same year that President McKay announced the creation of this college, that segregated schools in America were deemed unconstitutional through the famous court case Brown versus Board of Education. In other words, this university was ahead of its time. This campus also serves economically disadvantaged students and communities. A large portion of our students fund their entire education through one of our work-study programs. Basically, the cost of tuition, room and board, and meal plans are covered almost entirely as students work for 19 hours a week on our campus or at the Polynesian Cultural Center. So I hope while you're here, you have the opportunity to meet several of our students. And while you're here, hopefully you get to interact and ask about their stories of faith and perseverance in their pursuit of education. They are testament to the validity of our historic mission and vision. So again, I want to welcome you and also thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm glad that we're able to host this conference here at BYU Hawaii, as many of your objectives resonate with our values. Thank you, mahalo, and aloha.
Good morning. I'm Brett Scharffs, the director of the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University and a law professor at BYU. And on behalf of the organizers of this conference, the Religious Freedom and Human Dignity Initiative at BYU Hawaii and our center, I'd like to welcome you and to thank you for gathering here with us. I spoke briefly last night about the theme of human dignity, and I'd like to expand upon that slightly. But first, I'd like to thank Vice President Isaiah Walker for being here. I'm a little jealous of what counts as business attire here in Hawaii, so I hope you'll forgive me for following the conventions of the mainland rather than the conventions of the island. But feel free to make yourself comfortable in whatever attire you feel comfortable with. And I'd also like to echo what he said about the students here at BYU Hawaii. The opportunity I have had and that you will have to interact with them will be really inspiring to you. We have a lot to worry about in our world today based upon the political divisiveness that we're experiencing in many of our countries, the polarization, political and social, over so many issues. And the beautiful experiment that is BYU Hawaii is really a hope for the world. This long commitment going on 60 years, a 60-year commitment, or 70-year commitment in next year, to the idea of unity and diversity. It's almost a slogan today, but believe me, it wasn't when the university began all those years ago. And I hope that everyone who's affiliated with this institution will understand what a beautiful and unique light you have to bring to the world, because it is beautiful and radiant, and I believe has never been more needed at any time in the 70-year history of BYU Hawaii than it's needed today. Our center began focusing on the concept of human dignity about 6 years ago. We were preparing to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we were meeting with some of our important partners and friends, thinking about what we could do. And Jan Figel, who was then the EU Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief outside of the EU, helped us understand how important human dignity was as a concept that could build bridges and open doors in places where human rights and even religious freedom are challenging. And so that year, 2018, we held a series of conferences, one in Budapest, one at Oxford, and one at BYU, focusing on different aspects of human dignity. And this culminated in a document known as the Punta del Este Declaration on Human Dignity for Everyone Everywhere. And we carried over copies for all of you, so please pick one up if you're interested. This is a declaration, 10 brief articles of how useful human dignity is as a concept in peace building, in establishing a foundation for human rights, and as a principle for overcoming some of our differences by focusing on the deep roots of our shared humanity. Now, what we learned during that year is that when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being drafted, it was being drafted by a committee of 18 countries, and it was pretty diverse for the time when the United Nations only included 60 countries. There were countries from north and south, east and west, aligned with the Soviet bloc, aligned with the Western bloc. There were countries that were developed and less developed. There were countries with Christian majorities, Muslim majorities, Buddhist majorities, Hindu majorities, secular states with secular state ideologies. And it's actually something of a miracle that the Declaration got completed and adopted unanimously by the General Assembly of the United Nations on December 10th, 1948. Now, the first draft was a drafting committee of 3, and they couldn't agree because 2 of the personalities on the committee were in such sharp conflict with each other. And so they asked the secretary of the commission to come up with a secretary's draft, and he did. And it was 450 pages long. And it was basically a compendium of all of the rights instruments that had ever been adopted anywhere in the world since the beginning of time that are recorded. And this didn't do much to break the logjam. And so the drafting committee was expanded to 5, and there was I don't know what the right metaphor is. I come from farm stock, so think of a plow stuck in the mud because the horses can't move because the ground is just so muddy. And it was the Chinese delegate, P.C. Chang, who actually had an insight. He said, recall that the preamble to the United Nations Charter invokes human dignity. He said, why don't we start there? And this actually had, in my opinion, based on the research we've done, a transformative effect. And the process of drafting what became the UDHR was transformed, and it became much more generative, much more collaborative, and much more unifying. And the importance of human dignity is really announced on the face of the document. If you go to the UDHR, which is reproduced on the last page of this human dignity brochure, you'll see that the very first sentence of the preamble begins with these words: whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So the very first sentence of the preamble of the UDHR underscores the importance of human dignity to the projects of freedom, justice, and peace. And then if you slip down, sorry, the print here is pretty small. It's remarkable you can fit that 420 or 450 page document on one page. It ended up being 30 brief articles. Article 1, so the first operative provision of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, begins with these words: all human beings are born free and equal. Now we know that's not true, because there's nothing more dependent than a newborn child. And there's also a great inequality in the world, and inequality of human beings as we enter the world. But it doesn't stop there. It says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So in spite of all of the ways that we differ, there are ways in which we are similar. And we are endowed with these basic characteristics by the mere fact of being human. And these are equal dignity and rights. It goes on to say they are endowed with reason and conscience, and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Well, 70 years later, we found that focusing on the concept of human dignity was similarly generative. It helped us bridge differences. Human dignity, as Jan has said, is a place where religious humanists and secular humanists can meet. And we have found that to be true. But we've also found that human dignity is a deeply rich and multifaceted concept. One of the books that we produced is called Points of Light, and it includes quotations from about 100 of the signatories of the Punta del Este Declaration about what human dignity means to them. And as you read through those, your appreciation and understanding of this concept expands. And we're not interested in an imperial definition. What we're interested in is listening to each other and learning from each other from our varied perspectives on what human dignity means. And so over the last 5 years, our center, together with many partners, has been engaged in what we call the Human Dignity Initiative, which has included conferences and a special issue of the BYU Law Review on religious perspectives on human dignity. Another specifically on Christian perspectives on human dignity. A book that will be published this month focuses on courts and the use of human dignity as a principle of adjudication. Last year, we held three major conferences. Well, we held three major initiatives on aspects of human dignity. One was Asian Perspectives of Human Dignity, which was a conference held here at BYU Hawaii. And I'm happy to say that the project of turning that into a book that we hope will be published by Routledge is underway. We also held a conference on African perspectives on human dignity in Côte d'Ivoire. And the book on African perspectives of human dignity was actually published on December 10th, 2023, on the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we held two conferences, actually three conferences last year on Islamic perspectives on human dignity. One in Indonesia, one in Malaysia, and one in Qatar. And that book is going to take a little more time, but we're committed to bringing out a book on Islamic perspectives on human dignity as well. And as we were finishing the conference last year and thinking about what else remained to be done, our hearts and minds were turned to Oceania. And we realized that we didn't know very much about how the peoples of the Pacific think about human dignity in ways that can enrich and enhance the global discourse on this topic. And so we're here to listen. You won't hear from me again until the very end when we talk about next steps. We'll have a session at the very end thinking about what's the work that remains to be done. And I'm just grateful for the group we've gathered, because I think the opportunity we have to learn from each other is really, really momentous. So heartfelt thanks to the faculty advisors of the Religious Freedom and Human Dignity Initiative, especially the student board that runs that initiative, and all of the volunteers who stepped forward to help us. We're very grateful. And something we're doing today, well, we'll do it tomorrow, but in this conference, which is an innovation introduced by BYU Hawaii, is we'll have a panel entirely made up of students. And we'll invite them not just to dazzle us with their hospitality, but to also impress us with their perspectives on human dignity as well. So forgive me for saying mahalo and aloha, even though this is not my place, but I'm grateful to be here and feel like a welcome visitor. Thank you, everyone.